Hello, everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments as you watch this story unfold. Sarah was just 17 years old when she fell in love for the first time. The object of her admiration was a classmate named David. Naturally, she knew her group of friends would never accept the idea of someone like David being with a girl like her. Yet, Sarah was content to admire him from a distance. The truth is, her classmates were somewhat afraid of her because of unsettling rumors about her. Some claimed that Sarah could heal any illness, while others said she was crazy and spoke with old Mrs. Eleanor. Sarah indeed had a strong bond with Mrs. Eleanor. They spent a lot of time together, and Sarah discovered many new details about the old woman's life. It turns out that Mrs. Eleanor hadn't always lived isolated from the village. Her move to a remote home was necessary when she was blamed for failing to help a significant figure in the village. To avoid contact with the locals, Eleanor was forced to move. Even though more than 30 years had passed since then, she still remembered every word the villagers had said to her. Sometimes Sarah found her life dull, even though she knew she would soon grow up and move to the city. But she felt that nothing would change. One day, she asked Mrs. Eleanor how she could permanently rid herself of the ability she felt was keeping her from living a normal life. But the old woman responded that it wasn't possible to eliminate it entirely. Well, of course, there are ways, but before you proceed, you need to think carefully about whether you really want to lose it or not. There are people who dream of seeing and communicating with spirits, knowing things that ordinary people cannot. I don't even know how to answer you, Mrs. Eleanor said. The truth is, I worry that people will isolate me. They see something bad in me and are sure that I can harm them somehow, Sarah replied. People will always try to hurt you. It's all due to envy, Mrs. Eleanor remarked. Okay, Grandma, I'll keep this ability for a while longer. But honestly, maybe I should get rid of it. I never had a childhood because of it. And besides, I like a boy, but I'm sure he could never love me, Sarah confessed. Don't say such silly things. People will get used to it soon enough. There's nothing wrong with you, the old woman reassured her. Recently, Sarah realized she was spending most of her time with Mrs. Eleanor and wasn't as close to her mother as she used to be. Everyone feared the old woman and would relay any message through Sarah. Meanwhile, a new family moved into town. A woman named Linda, fleeing her neglectful husband, arrived with her son. Sarah's mother had been in contact with Linda, but unfortunately, Sarah couldn't become friends with her son, Mark. One evening, as Sarah returned from Mrs. Eleanor's place, darkness fell and autumn was setting in. Approaching her home, she heard muffled conversations and sobbing as if someone was crying. She entered the house and found no sign of her mother in the kitchen. Her father sat there with a sorrowful expression. "Dad, where's Mom?" Sarah asked, studying her father closely. "She might be at the neighbor's." "Didn't you hear anything? Didn't you hear what happened?" "No, I haven't heard anything. I just came from visiting Mrs. Eleanor." "Linda's son drowned today," her father replied. "How did it happen?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "I don't know. There's a lot of mystery around it. Your mom is there, trying to comfort her. Maybe the boy went to the lake on his own." "Yes, honestly, I don't know anything more. Now go wash your face. When your mom gets back, you can ask her," her father said. Sarah went to her room, trying to process what her father had just told her. She anxiously waited for her mother to return and explain what happened. Unfortunately, her mother came home late and wasn't eager to talk much. Only the next morning did Carla, Sarah's mother, reveal that Mark had indeed passed away. "But how did it happen?" Sarah asked. "I honestly don't know. Linda is convinced Mark would never go to the lake alone, but the police ruled it as an accident. The boy was too young to swim alone, you know. We think Linda just wants answers," Carla explained. "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to reach out to her for the next 40 days. Mark's spirit will linger, but I doubt he will tell me anything." "I'm not sure how she'll endure these 40 days, Sarah remarked, shaking her head. Then came the funeral, where Sarah saw firsthand the grief Linda was enduring. She didn't understand what had happened, but felt certain she would uncover the truth. On the way back from the cemetery, Sarah thought about how unlikely it was that Mark would have gone to the lake on his own. But he also didn't seem like the type to end his life so absurdly. He liked the village and had many friends there. Sarah was completely puzzled. She couldn't identify who was responsible. After a few days, Sarah and her mother visited Linda. Carla was very worried about her friend's well-being. When they arrived at Linda's house, Sarah was surprised by the disarray. Amidst the mess, Linda sat crying, wiping away her tears. "Linda, calm down," Carla said, hugging her friend tightly. "I can't believe he's gone. I always wanted to protect him from this cruel world. That's why I came here," Linda sobbed, and Sarah found it unbearable. "I understand how you feel, but now there's nothing more we can do," Carla said while still holding Linda, who cried and reminisced about how wonderful Mark had been. Suddenly, Linda turned to Sarah and said, "You know how to speak with spirits. Can you help me?" "Of course, I can try, but I'm not sure yet." "The 40 days haven't passed," Sarah responded. "Please, dear, this is so important to me. I need to know about Mark," Linda pleaded. Sarah made Linda sit in a chair and stood behind her, whispering for a few minutes. She made mistakes and had to restart the incantation several times. Shadows and spirits seemed to retreat before Sarah could understand what was going on. "I'm sorry, I can't do this yet. Something is stopping me," Sarah said. "We need to wait 4 more days," she advised. Linda felt a surge of hope, even though she knew those 4 days would be excruciating. "It's going to be okay, Linda. We'll get through this. I promise everything will be resolved. If anyone is guilty, they'll be punished. This won't end like this. Don't worry," Sarah assured her. "I hope you're right," Linda replied. Sarah and her mother returned home, and Sarah was worried about Linda's condition. It seemed like she spent her days crying, without eating or leaving the house. "It's so sad that someone has to live like this," Carla remarked. Finally, the 40 days passed. Linda rushed to Sarah, pleading, "I can't take this anymore. I need your help, please." "All right, sit on the couch," Sarah said. Linda obeyed, and Sarah stood behind her, placing her hands on Linda's shoulders. She began to murmur something. Linda then clearly saw the spirit of her son enter the room. He looked just as he had the last time she saw him. He sat in front of his mother and smiled. "You can ask him whatever you want to know," Sarah said. Linda looked at her son as if she were hypnotized. She had never thought the world of spirits could be real. "Son, I missed you so much," Linda said. "I missed you too, Mom," Mark replied. "Tell me the truth. Why did this happen?" Linda asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mark smiled gently, explaining that he would never have taken his own life. "But how did it all happen?" Linda pressed, desperate for answers. "It was my dad. He found me and tried to take me away with him. I didn't want to go, so he hit me a few times. Then he forced me into his car and took me away from the village. He knew you wouldn't handle it well, so when I tried to escape, I jumped from the moving car. After realizing I was hurt, he left me near the lake," Mark revealed. Linda nearly fainted at his confession, struggling to imagine that her ex-husband had orchestrated such a tragedy. "My son, how can I prove that Matthew was involved?" Linda asked. "In the house, under the table, you'll find his lighter. He dropped it while he was trying to force me into the car. Don't touch it. It has his fingerprints. And also, a man who lives on the outskirts of the village saw him when he came looking for directions," Mark said. Linda looked at her son intently, wishing she could hug him, but Sarah held her back. "I want to hug him," Linda pleaded. "No, you can't do that. He's not truly here. It's only his spirit," Sarah explained. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm okay," Mark reassured her, making Linda cry once more. Losing her son was an unbearable pain, and she didn't know how she would keep going. He was the reason she got up every morning. Afterward, Mark got up from the table, smiled at his mother, and quietly exited through the door. Linda clung to Sarah, crying, and whispered, "I wouldn't have made it without you." "You can, Linda. You're strong, and Mark wants you to carry on," Sarah said. The conversation with her son had changed many things for Linda. She felt a sense of relief and immediately called the authorities to inform them that she knew who was responsible for Mark's death. However, the officer, Detective Jones, laughed off the idea that Sarah could communicate with spirits, finding it bizarre and dismissing it outright. "I have proof. There's a witness who saw my ex-husband Matthew asking for directions that day. He's not as innocent as you think," Linda insisted. In the end, Linda managed to file a criminal case. The investigation revealed that Matthew had indeed been involved in Mark's death. He was charged, and now the justice system would handle the rest. Linda was immensely grateful to Sarah, knowing that without her, she might never have uncovered the truth. After this incident, Sarah began to view her ability in a new light. Many villagers started to approach her for help, even those who had once doubted her talents. When the mother of the boy Sarah liked came to her for assistance, Sarah realized that she did not want to give up this ability, as it could benefit society. David began to pay more attention to her. Now, Sarah studied in the city, and news of her abilities spread nationwide. People from other towns sought her counsel. Sarah realized that Mrs. Eleanor had not passed on her abilities by accident. She had chosen Sarah as an heir. Without children of her own, Eleanor decided to teach Sarah, and Sarah believed it wasn't just a coincidence. She hoped that Mrs. Eleanor would be proud of her. Every weekend when she came home, Sarah would visit the elderly woman. As for Linda, she still struggled to feel normal, even after accepting that she would never see her son again. She couldn't forgive her ex-husband for what he had done, but she was determined to remain strong despite her pain. This story would be remembered forever in the village. One cold winter day, a large black car pulled up in front of their home. Carla rushed to the door to see who had arrived and was so shocked she couldn't speak. It was her parents, who she hadn't seen for years. Carla stood there, unsure of what to say, but curious about how they had found her address. "Hello, my dear," her mother greeted with a gentle voice. "Hi, Mom," Carla replied. "So, this is where you live," her mother said, looking around the house. "Pedro is at work, so I'm here alone. Should I invite you in, or would you rather stay outside?" Carla asked. "Let's go in," her mother agreed. It was the weekend, and Carla introduced her parents to their granddaughter, whom they had never met. Carla felt a pang of sadness seeing how much her parents had aged. Her mother no longer seemed as stern as she had nearly 20 years ago. "You know, I'm sorry we couldn't reconcile sooner," her mother said softly. "I'm sorry, too. We could have been close." "Everything happened because you couldn't understand me," Carla replied. "Forgive me. I see now that I was wrong. I shouldn't have made things so difficult for you," her mother said. Carla looked into her mother's eyes, then embraced her tightly. For the first time in her life, her family gathered together in her own home. "I would love for you to stay a few days. Pedro will be back from work tonight, and we could have a family dinner," Carla suggested. "It's wonderful to be here with you." "We're so happy," her mother replied with a smile. That evening, they sat around a large table, talking about everything that had happened over the past 20 years. Sarah had grown up in an ordinary family, with faint memories of their move to this town. The family lived a simple but stable life. Her father worked as a tractor driver, and her mother at a local shop. Sarah went to school and never imagined she would one day experience such a remarkable story. Sarah had always been a bright girl, surrounded by friends. As a child, she dreamed of helping people when she grew up to be loved by all. But she could never have predicted how life would turn out. Growing up, Sarah was never home, always out with friends. She enjoyed living in the town and appreciated the uniqueness of the people there. She excelled at school, and her mother hoped that one day, Sarah would graduate with good grades and find a stable job. Carla dreamed that Sarah would leave their small town and make a better life for herself. 10 years ago, Carla and her husband moved to this town because they couldn't afford a house in the big city. Despite Carla coming from a wealthy background, she chose to live like an ordinary person because she had chosen love over her father's wealth. She never regretted her choice, even though she knew her parents might never forgive her. She vividly remembered the arguments with her parents, who disapproved of her relationship with Pedro. They were convinced he was only after the family's money. But one day, Carla climbed out of her window and ran away with Pedro, determined to be with the man she loved. Years later, despite all the challenges, she still believed she had made the right decision. Pedro did everything he could to make Carla happy, and she felt grateful every morning she woke up by his side. Her parents didn't reach out to her after she left, but she had left a letter behind, explaining that she would marry Pedro with or without their blessing. Communication between them ceased, and her parents disinherited her after she married Pedro, whom they despised. Now Carla lived with a man she loved, raising their daughter and hoping that Sarah would have a peaceful life. Sarah loved the town, did well in school, and had many friends, until the day she ventured into the forest with her friends and encountered Mrs. Eleanor. Subscribe to the channel and click on the notification. Help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. This way YouTube will deliver this content to more people who will benefit. I count on your help. That fateful encounter set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. And although Sarah's life had taken a path she never anticipated, she embraced the role she had inherited, finding strength in the abilities she had once viewed as a curse. Now Sarah had grown into a confident young woman, and the legacy she carried was no longer a burden, but a gift, a way to help others in ways she never thought possible.